The world has been watching in shock what played out at the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. At last count, 19 students had been killed in one of the worst instances of mass shooting in a school in the United States. But this is not the first, and God forbid, it is unlikely to be the last school shooting. The most famous, the one which captured the national imagination, was at the Columbine High School in Colorado in April of 1999. 12 students and one teacher were killed in that attack. It's the first major school shooting that went national. But after that, there have been major shootings at schools, universities, theaters, and even public parks. From Sandy Hook to the Parkland School to Virginia Tech, every year the United States sees tens of hundreds of mass shootings. On average, the US sees more than 500 incidents of mass shootings every single year. And that number is only rising with every passing year. So the question is, how does this keep happening in the world's most advanced and supposedly most progressive country? That's the big question we'll try to probe further on Crux Decode this week. Domestic demand for guns in the United States is quite high, yes. But the high demand is not the only reason. There is the easy availability of guns, particularly assault weapons, as well as the lax gun laws that are also major contributors. Now, the reason for lax gun laws is because gun companies want guns to be easily available, and they are paying to influence the government. If the government wanted to tighten gun laws, they could have easily done so despite the high demand, like they do, for example, with marijuana. Even though the demand for marijuana is high and people are willing to pay an extra price for it, most state governments and the federal government of the United States has outlawed the possession, consumption, or the sale of marijuana. In the case of guns, if the laws were to be tighter, more licenses would be required. It would also mean greater background checks of those who are buying these guns. The government would still make some money off these regulations, but the gun companies would have lower sales and lower profits. They would be the biggest losers. The biggest of such associations, which represent the gun manufacturers, is the NRA, or the National Rifle Association. It was founded in 1871 by two US Civil War veterans as part of a recreational group. The motto of this group was designed to promote and encourage rifle shooting on a scientific basis. In 1975, they formed a lobbying arm. It's called the Institute for Legislative Action. The job of this lobbying firm was to influence government policy and make it favorable for easy access to guns. And in 1977, the NRA formed its own Political Action Committee, or PAC, to channel funds to legislators. Now, this PAC is one of the biggest funders in the United States, and it can make or break the election fortunes of many congressmen and women. The NRA is among the most powerful special interest lobby groups in the United States right now. It has a substantial budget to influence members of Congress on gun policy. It is run by its executive vice president, Wayne LaPierre. In 2020, the NRA spent about $250 million. That is far more than all of the country's gun control advocacy groups put together. The NRA officially says it spent about $3 million last year to influence gun policy. However, that is only the recorded contributions to lawmakers. Considerable amounts of money are spent elsewhere, either through super PACs or through independent contributions. Now, these are funds which are very difficult to track, even for the IRS. The NRA grades members of Congress from A to F on their perceived friendliness to gun rights. Now, these ratings can have a very serious effect on poll numbers and even cost pro-gun control candidates their seat. So A means you're favorable, most favorable to easy access to guns, whereas F means you're most in the pro-gun control lobby. The NRA has boasted some high-profile members over the years, including former President George H.W. Bush. Current members of the NRA include former vice presidential candidate and Republican Party leader Sarah Palin, actors Tom Selleck and Whoopi Goldberg. In fact, the late actor Charlton Heston was a former NRA president. Back in 1999, after the Columbine shooting, he famously held a rifle over his head, And he said to gun control advocates that they would be able to take his gun away from him from, quote, my cold, dead hands, unquote. The NRA lobbies heavily against all forms of gun control. It basically argues that guns make the country safer and not less safe. Its chief had once famously said after a school shooting that the reason the shooting happened was because the school did not have an armed guard. The NRA relies on and staunchly defends a disputed interpretation of the Second Amendment to the US Constitution. Groups like the NRA argue that the Second Amendment basically gives US citizens the rights to bear arms without any government oversight whatsoever. Now, many legal experts, many liberals contest this interpretation. Neither is there enough will in Congress to pass a bill through and put enough safeguards on gun usage. But that's only one small speck of the problem. What is less discussed is the almost $500 billion defense industry. This industry is supplying weapons to the war in Ukraine, for example. And mind you, even though the US and NATO are officially on the side of Ukraine in this particular war, there are also private US defense manufacturers whose platforms are being used by the Russian side, are being used actively by the Russian military. After all, a war would be a boon for weapons manufacturers, and they couldn't care less where their new orders are coming from, whether it's coming from the Ukrainian side or from the Russian side. All of this is resulting in massive profits for American weapons makers. This conflict, this current war, has already seen massive growth in defense spending announced by both Europe as well as the United States. In fact, the European Union has said that it would buy and deliver 450 million pounds of arms sales to Ukraine. The United States, on the other hand, has already pledged $350 million in military aid. This is in addition to the over 90 tons of military supplies and the $650 million of military aid that was given in the last 1 year alone. Now, this is a major boon for the world's largest defense contractors. Just to give you a couple of examples, Raytheon makes the Stinger missiles, and jointly with Lockheed Martin, it makes the Javelin anti-tank missile. Both of these, the Stinger and the Javelin, have been critical in the Ukrainian military's success against the Russian army, particularly in areas around Kiev. Now, Lockheed Martin shares were trading at $380 a share just a day before this war began, on the 23rd of February. Today, almost 3 months later, they are trading at $450 a share. So clearly you can see how this war has benefited some of America's major defense contractors. So it comes back to this vicious and seemingly unending cycle where you have weapons manufacturers who mass produce these weapons. You have lobbyists like the NRA who pay Congress and pay legislators to keep gun laws lax and relaxed, and then they feed in to their electoral success or loss by depending on who the groups like NRA back for elections, whether they are midterm elections like the one that's coming up later this year, or even for that matter, presidential elections, which happen once every 4 years. So you see this, like I said, a seemingly unending but vicious cycle between lobby groups like the NRA, congressmen and women, and then defense companies who are only happy to sit on huge profits.